I think it's a little bit, for me, even less than unlikely, especially with Donald Trump running for the president.
You know what, Roland, our country is full, most recently even, in the last 2 elections, of something that happened that people thought was unlikely. So don't discount what we can do if we all work together.
Oh, I understand, but we're going to pray on that one.
So if you're going to talk about stuff that's unlikely, okay, but you're trying to get the most likely candidate up for the Supreme Court, why didn't you put an African American up there, since that quote unquote was going to be unlikely? That's bullshit.
All right, Valerie Jarrett, Senior Advisor to the President. We appreciate this.
You're welcome, Roland.
Well, welcome back. All right, folks, let's go right back to our panel. All of you heard Valerie Jarrett. Go.
That's it.
Well,
Speechless.
They forget that the Republicans are clear. They're playing politics. What we heard today was apolitical. It was lacking in the kind of political strategy that is required at this time. And if people have been talking about, well, this president plays chess. Well, if they're playing politics, you better play some politics.
Well, actually, the president's playing chess, Republicans playing rugby.
Right.
No, but this is,
Right.
they're not.
Right.
The Republicans are clear. They ain't playing chess.
Right.
They're playing politics. They're playing bad politics.
Yes,
They learned
very
nothing
bad
from Loretta
politics.
Lynch. They had another African American
That's
woman
right.
who the Senate wanted to not confirm, deny her a
Previously
hearing.
confirmed twice.
That's right.
And what was
Unanimous.
politics? She got African American women and other people to say there had to be a hearing, there had to be an up and down vote. The Republicans were saying no, but they could not deny this African American women. The symbolism was just too great. So on the politics, it seems to me the politics here favor an African American woman appointment.
We're on the brink of disaster. I mean, we are at a moment where if we don't get someone confirmed, we risk having the first president in our nation's history put a nominee forward who doesn't get a confirmation of a hearing or a vote, with 2 exceptions, for 2 presidents whose nominees were withdrawn.
This broad don't get it. That's exactly what's going to happen. So how does Merrick Garland get him a vote other than people liking him? They are acting against the president, and they will continue to act against him until it is clear that he is no longer going to be, or no longer in the presidential chair, i.e. after the election. At that point, they will loosen up depending on who's who. Now, God forbid it's Republican, then this guy will not get a hearing, period. So where this broad is coming from, honestly, I don't understand it. I mean, she's an attorney. She's supposed to be an educated woman, and she just ain't getting it.
I think it is critically important that we look at this in context again. This president has been really good. Loretta Lynch serves as our attorney general. I understand why some people are disappointed.
Right.
But this is a president who fairly looked at a field of very diverse candidates and made a choice, and I think it's important that we stand by the president and put the pressure now on the Senate to do its job and give the nominee, the president's nominee, a hearing and a vote.
Oh, hell no, I ain't standing by somebody that ain't standing by me. So again, she's full of shit. She sounds just like those Republicans, and I hate to say it, but this is not kumbaya time. And she's sounding more and more like a coonette as far as I'm concerned, because she's not even pushing the gender of African American women. And I'd be more than interested to see exactly what her marital status is like.
So there are just a few observations that I want to make. This White House has also pushed for tech diversity. You have a Congress, particularly Congressional Black Caucus, Reverend Jackson, that push for diverse representation in industries all over this country. When the president makes a calculated, political calculation, nonetheless, decision to say, I'm going to call the white fraternity of the United States Senate to the carpet and see if they'll confirm my nominee regardless of who it is, a moderate that is palpable to them. That is a calculation that says, I have to meet you where you are because you still can't digest me. You can't digest my greatness and when I'm qualified abundantly and brilliant. There are black legal minds, I wish it was a black woman, but a black person, period, because Clarence Thomas ain't it. Like, he's just really not it.
I'm
like,
telling you.
We just have to have that representation. I want somebody on the court who can say back to Justice Scalia, I know he's dead now, but Justice Scalia in that moment in the affirmative action case that black people perhaps need to be in lesser track schools, slower paced schools, or Justice Roberts who pushes back on our ability to survive in STEM fields. I want a black legal mind that can push back on that from experience. And I don't think that it's asking too much. We totally lose ground when we say we're not going to put forth a diverse candidate because we can't find someone who's as qualified as this white man. I'm not going to put this on Judge Garland, but this is about us and our needs at this time.
And it's about
Kick their ass, Angela.
We've had,
And his legacy.
1970s, since the 1970s, we've had a far-right conservative court. It doesn't make sense for this president to waste a Supreme Court nomination on a moderate when you need a court. Kristen, you're talking about 9 people on the court. You need the right people.
That's right.
I'm sorry. It's not just anybody that gets
Well,
up
I
there.
want to be
because
clear.
the court is going to be
Final comment, real quick.
We have to vet this nominee. We have to look at Judge Garland's record.
She keeps talking about vetting people. That's bullshit.
It will be a jurist who can fairly interpret the Constitution and who will be right on the issues that matter to
Black
us.
Lives Matter's moment, we know that he is the wrong man for the job. He is very conservative
Yes.
on criminal justice. He is pro-police.
Makes
He's pro-law enforcement. It doesn't make sense that he's the
deserves
nominee
zero.
at this time.
And let me say this as a final comment, and this is very clear. Constance Baker Motley,
Yes.
Ella Baker,
Yes.
Fannie Lou Hamer,
Yes.
Septima Clark, Coretta Scott King, Mary McLeod Bethune, Dorothy Height.
My God.
You cannot convince me that if those black women were alive today, they would not be standing up for black women.
That's right.
Thanks a bunch. We appreciate it. We'll keep our focus on this case.
Thank you.
All right. So, and he told it the way it is. This is bullshit. And that chick, Kristen Clark, like I said, I'd be very, very much interested in knowing what her marital status is, because she's sounding like a bunch of those other coons that are always talking about wait your turn and we should not push. The only time change occurs and the only time stuff gets done is when we push. And I'm not talking about a little gentle love tap. I'm talking about push it balls to the walls, because other than that, we ain't gonna get shit. And Obama is a perfect example of that. He, throughout his entire presidential career, has been one to attempt to compromise. He has never kicked no ass, okay? Never. And when he lost the Senate and the House 2 years into his administration, that's when any and all progress, social progress in particular, ended. And I challenge anybody to debate me on that point. Once he lost the power, and he did have power for 2 years, it basically was over, and now it's just a question of executive orders, and they have even taken him to court over his executive orders, trying to claim that they're unconstitutional, and the conservative court is basically siding with them in a lot, if not most of the cases. So this is a bunch of bullshit, and Obama, he missed the call on this one. Okay, this is the interview that Roland's going to do with Valerie Jarrett, and yeah, she just she's a smart woman, but the arguments that she makes, it just pisses me off.
As we continue our focus on President Barack Obama's Supreme Court Justice nominee, Judge Merrick Garland. An announcement was made yesterday in the Rose Garden to replace Justice Anthony Scalia, who died about a month ago. Joining us right now from the White House briefing room is Valerie Jarrett. She is Senior Advisor to President Barack Obama. Valerie, welcome back to News 1 Now TV 1.
Good morning, Roland. How are you?
I'm doing great. First question, what specifically about this pick made him the best choice in the president's eyes?
Good question, Roland. There is nobody on the federal bench with more experience, depth of experience than Chief Judge Garland. He's been on the Federal Circuit Court here in D.C., which is the second highest court in the country, for 19 years. He's been the Chief Judge for 3 years. He's just had more experience, coupled with the fact that he's a consensus builder. He would have immediate respect of his peers on the Supreme Court, and he's a really decent man. He's a person that understands the purpose of the Supreme Court, abides by the rule of law, and he would represent our country well on the Supreme Court.
All right, so then why didn't Obama pick him instead of Kagan if he had all of these qualities, and Kagan basically had none of the qualities? She didn't even serve on the federal bench. She came from an even lower court. So your argument for him is not holding water given your pick of Kagan.
You talk about that experience, that depth, but the reality is the last Supreme Court pick, Elena Kagan, had none other than being Solicitor General. And so explain the difference between the two, where you have a Kagan who never served on the federal bench, and then you have this depth of Justice Garland.
Yeah, I think the president felt that at this moment in time, given the Republican obstructionism that we're seeing, it was important to have a candidate who, by any possible metric, is unassailable. And as you heard yesterday in the press from both sides of the aisle, a lot of support for him. No one's questioning his credentials. No one. What the Republicans are saying is that they don't want to give him a hearing. Many don't even want to meet with him. But nobody is questioning his credentials. And the president decided from the very beginning he was going to play this straight. He was going to find the best possible candidate, particularly given what we've been hearing from the Republicans. It was important to have somebody whose credentials were absolutely unassailable, and the chief judge meets that standard.
Now, Obama, okay, based on what she said, Obama's going to play this straight. Well, the goddamn Republicans aren't playing it straight, so, you know, you're going to have one guy that's playing by the rules and the other guy that's cheating? Come on, give me a break.
Talk about the Republicans. The reality is they made it perfectly clear they're not going to consider any nominee, regardless of who they are, regardless of their background. And so exactly what is the White House strategy here in terms of trying to get Republicans to even consider this nominee, or better yet, meet with them?
Well, first of all, Roland, you know, people change their minds. 2/3 of the American people support the president's candidate nominee having an opportunity for a hearing.
Okay, so and that means exactly what? Because back when they were talking about universal background checks, 75% of the people supported universal background checks. What minds did those change? Zero, because we still don't have universal background checks. So your argument is flawed, both logically and by example.
I think that's a data point that should be important to the Republicans. As recently as yesterday, we began to hear Republicans, more than a handful, saying that they would actually have a meeting with him, so that's progress. And we're going to keep making our case. And Roland, as you and I have discussed before, you know, the president does his job, and the Constitution requires him to make a nomination when there's a vacancy on the Supreme Court.
We're not talking about the president doing his job at this point. What we're talking about is the president being responsive to the people that helped him to initially get elected and to maintain his office, who have voted for him in the largest block as far as any group is concerned, and him basically just thumbing his nose at them for what he considers to be a political purpose. He missed the boat on this.
So he did that, and his nominee is willing to go up. He'll be up on the Hill today. He's willing to talk to anyone who will meet with him. He understands it's the burden is on him to make his case for why he is qualified, and he is more than prepared to do that. And now it's time for the Republicans to do their job and not simply block a nominee because we're in an election year. Roland, that's ridiculous. The president was elected for a 4-year term. The people did speak. We don't need them to speak again until his term is over. That's how our Constitution works. There's nothing in the Constitution that says, oh, in an election year, the president doesn't get to nominate someone to fill a vacancy on the most important court, the highest court of our land, where we can't afford to have 4-4 splits.
You said that that folks changed their mind, but I don't see where Republicans are showing they're going to change their minds. They're digging their heels. It wasn't long after the president spoke when Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, went to the floor to reiterate his position. Of the 3 of the 4 people who announced yesterday that they would actually meet with him, several of them made it clear they'll meet with him, but to tell him to his face why they're not even going to consider his nomination. And 3 of them also from those swing states that will be critical for re-election in the fall. And so show me the pathway with this pick that the Senate, led by Republicans, would actually even have a confirmation hearing, especially with them going on vacation in July through November.
Well, so they're going to go back to their districts for their break coming up. And I think they're going to hear from a lot of their constituents, the 2/3 who I told you were in favor of having the president's nominee have a hearing. And
that doesn't matter because, see, every last single damn one of them basically could hear from their constituents, with 2/3 of them basically saying that yeah, they want a hearing, but then they're gonna they know that if they give a hearing, they're gonna be primaried from the right, okay, and potentially lose their jobs. So they're not going to give up on this because that far right, as far as they're concerned, the Tea Party is going to push the shit out of them and make this an issue if they do give up a hearing. So now you tell me that they're going to go back to and listen to their constituents. And I'll state it again. They haven't listened to their constituents before on things like gun control. So why are they going to listen to their constituents now? That's bullshit, and she knows it.
they're listening to their constituents, then, you know, you would think that they would follow their wishes, because obviously this is an election year for them too. And so if you go back home and 2/3 of the people in your district, in your states, are saying, why wouldn't you at least be fair and give the nominee a hearing? Why would you not give them the opportunity to be heard? Why would you say, just coming right out of the gates, even before they knew who the president was going to nominate, that they wouldn't give him a hearing? And now that they know who he is, and that they know that he has been confirmed overwhelmingly in a bipartisan nature in the past, and we know how popular he is on both sides of the aisle, where both Republican and Democratic senators in the past have spoken out strongly about his credentials, why wouldn't you give him a hearing?
Okay, and let me say this. Okay, you're seeing all of these primaries on the Republican sides, okay? And Donald Trump is winning all these primaries by 30 to 40%. And these are rabid Trump fans, okay? Then now add to that the Ted Cruz guys, okay? And that's going to give you another 20% somewhere in the vicinity. So, you know, she's full of shit when she's talking about 67% of the people want a hearing. Nah, 67% of the people don't want a hearing. The Trump people, they definitely don't want a hearing. The Cruz people don't want a hearing. And guess what? If you throw the Rubio people in, which made 10, 15%, they don't want a hearing. So you're talking about 30 and 20 is 15, another 15, that's 65. That's 2/3 of the people who don't want to have a hearing. So she's full of shit.
You're afraid of a hearing and then give them an up-down vote. That's what the people expect. And so we're going to keep working this and making our case to the American people. And as I said, the Chief Judge is going to be up on the Hill today, and he will meet anytime, any place with members of the Judiciary Committee who want to hear from him.
This is the third nominee of this president. Sotomayor was first, Kagan was second, and now you have Judge Garland. Why wasn't a black woman chosen? Especially with the litany of African-American women who are eminently qualified to serve on the Supreme Court.
Well, so let's talk about that. So the fact of the matter is that the president has appointed 26 African-American women.
When they say the fact of the matter is, immediately following that is bullshit. Always remember that whenever they say the fact of the matter is, there is bullshit coming immediately after.
To the district and circuit court. That's more than any other president. 19% of his appointees to the district and circuit courts have been African Americans. So the president appreciates the importance of diversity. And in the array of candidates who he considered for this position, there was definitely diversity, including African Americans. But in the final analysis, he decided that the chief judge was the right person at this moment. And that's the president's call. And we should rally behind that decision, because why on earth would the Republicans deny the president of the United States this opportunity? What is it about this president and this election cycle that is unique? And I would remind your viewers, Roland, just think about Justice Kennedy, who serves on the Supreme Court now. He was nominated by President Reagan, a Republican. Then chairman of the Judiciary, now Vice President Biden, gave him a hearing. And you know what? He was approved 93-0 by a Democratic-controlled Senate in an election year. So that's the precedent. So we have process and precedent on our side, and we know how important it is to have a full Supreme Court. So why would people be denying the president his pick?
In all of that rhetoric, she did say or answer the question. And the answer that she gave was, that was the president's call. So he made the call that he did not want an African American woman on the court. Everything else she said was rhetoric and bullshit. But that was the answer to the question.
Just use the word unique. Unique also is the fact that black women voted at a higher rate than anybody in the country for this president in 2008. They voted at a higher rate than anybody in 2012. They are a critical component to any election year in the history of America. No black woman has ever been appointed. This was an opportunity to make an historic appointment to the Supreme Court that also could have been even more legacy defining for President Barack Obama. What do you say to those black women who say they are extremely disappointed when they've had the president's back in those very difficult times when he's been attacked by many people, and understanding those other nominees, they could have even been pulled from those nominees, that there was not a black woman in this time, in this place, in the 21st century to be on the United States Supreme Court.
Well, so Roland, I would go back to saying how important the president thinks diversity is for the court, not because it's something that he owes politically, but because he believes diversity is a strength, and we make better decisions when we have diversity, and
that may be true, but he does owe a debt. He does owe a debt that he hasn't paid. He owes a political debt. Now, I'm not saying that he should have nominated an unqualified African-American woman, because there are tons of them out there. But he does, in fact, owe a debt, and he's refusing to pay.
not just on the court. That's in his administration, it's in his cabinet. He believes it should be in the private sector. So let's stipulate that he believes diversity is a strength, and his track record, as I said, the 26 women who sit, African-American women, who sit on the court today because President Obama appointed them because he thought they could make a valuable contribution. But I will go back to what I said at the outset. At this moment, what he wants to do is to get someone confirmed. And so he selected the person who he thought, in his judgment, had the most likely chance of being confirmed. And that's important for the African-American community and our country as a whole, to have a complete Supreme Court. And that's the judgment he made.
Bullshit, because if you put the wrong guy up there, we're going to be fucked for another 15 or 20 years for sure. Now, the only saving grace here is that the next president, and obviously we're hoping that it's going to be a Democrat, is going to have the opportunity to name 3 Supreme Court justices. One of them is going to be a replacement for Ruth Bader Ginsburg. One of them is going to be a replacement for Kennedy, who's a moderate Republican. Okay, he's normally a swing vote. And the third, and the name escapes me, but it's a conservative Republican. So if the next president replaces all 3 of those, she may or he may have the ability to reformulate the court and push it to a more progressive side. But Obama could have done that right now with this particular pick, and he failed.
I've heard from several individuals, several organizations who said, based upon the pick, that they don't have the energy or the impetus to go to fight for this nominee. That had a historic appointment was made. You also have to consider the calculus of this election year. You have 6 United States senators who are in these swing states who very well could lose and flip the United States Senate. Many believe that had an African-American woman been appointed, you have an opportunity to really create an even broader wedge issue and drive even more folks to the polls. And also, on Tuesday, on the Tom Joyner Morning Show, I specifically asked Secretary Hillary Clinton, had the president nominated a black woman to the Supreme Court and that person was denied by the Republicans, would she, if elected, renominate that black woman to the court? Her answer was yes.
Well, you're making a very strong political argument, Roland, and I think what I would remind you is that the president he's not in a political campaign. He's the president of the United States, and he's making judgments that he thinks are best for our country.
That's bullshit. Every decision the president makes has some basis in politics. So for her to open her mouth and say that his decision was not a political one, that's bullshit.
And I'll tell you, we had a big group of civil rights leaders and progressives who met with the president yesterday in the Roosevelt Room right after his nomination.
I want to see the video on that because she's going to get out there and say how gung-ho they were. But in a previous video, the NAACP has issued one of those lukewarm milquetoast statements about reviewing the nominee's qualifications. So that don't seem like kumbaya to me.
The chief judge, and the energy and enthusiasm in that room was palpable.
I want to see the video.
These are the folks who have the grassroots efforts that are going to go out around the country, particularly in the states where we have Republicans who need to be paying attention, and they think that there's enormous energy because this isn't just about the nominee. This is about the president of the United States.
See, Roland's there asking trying to call her out, and he's asking which civil rights groups, and she ain't, and she's not going to say anything other than, oh, there's a list of all the groups that attended. Because if she had started mentioning names, he would have asked her exactly, how gung-ho, these individuals were, and she would have got caught.
I mean, I'm not gonna, we distributed the full list of everybody who was in the room yesterday, and I encourage you to take a look at it. But Roland, the fact of the matter is that this is not just about the nominee. This is about President Obama and what he is able to do as the President of the United States. And my expectation is the vast majority of people around this country, including African Americans, are going to say, wait a minute, you're not going to give this president an opportunity for his nominee to have a fair hearing? That's simply not fair, it's not right, and it's not who we are. So I'm not discounting the fact that there are people who might be disappointed because they wanted an African-American woman, but I'm saying in his judgment, and we should trust his judgment and support him on this, he made the call about who has the best chance of getting confirmed, and we have to keep our eye on the prize. And the point isn't here to make a political statement and have a rallying cry for the election. The point is to get somebody actually confirmed and on the Supreme Court. And you might think those chances are unlikely, but we're going to work really hard to make sure that happens.
And that's bullshit because the Republicans, they're in a win situation. They don't have to give this fucking guy, I'm sorry, they don't have to give this justice a hearing, period, okay? And if either the Republican nominee happens to win, he definitely ain't going to get a hearing. If the Senate doesn't flip, he doesn't necessarily have to get a hearing, okay? So basically, the Republicans are saying they are going to give this guy a hearing if the president is, the future president is a Democrat, which we will find out obviously after Election Day, and the Senate flips over to being a future democratically controlled Senate. At that point, I guarantee, told you so, they are going to rush his confirmation through as fast as greased lightning, because that will be their last opportunity in order to try to maintain some semblance of a Supreme Court justice that will at least side with them on some issues. So she's full